Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into the specific historical framework and timelines detailed in our source documents regarding the dormancy of the state assemblies. Let's get right into how these original governmental structures operated and the exact events that triggered their incredible 160-year suspension.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to strictly follow the source text to outline what were state assemblies, the historical changes in dormancy, effects on self-governance, long-term consequences, the historical significance of it all, and then we'll wrap up with a quick summary. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. What were state assemblies?
To start, we really need to understand how the source documents define these bodies. The texts state that these state assemblies are the absolutely only entities with actual lawful standing, as well as a rightful claim to the physical assets of the United States. They are described as the only states that possess physically defined international borders, and they're populated by living men and women on the land and soil.
The documents brilliantly break this structure down into two distinct branches. First, you've got the General Assembly. They handled the business end of things, matters of land, soil, and international trade. And they meet periodically, usually after the winter holidays. Then, on the flip side, there's the State Jural Assembly. They handle continuous judicial functions and enforce public law. And unlike the General Assembly, the texts note that the Jural Assembly operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long.
That brings us to Section 2, Historical Changes and Dormancy. So what exactly disrupted this established system? Well, the source materials describe a massive intervening event, which they directly characterize as an, quote, illegal mercenary conflict misrepresented as a war. Alongside a 19th century putsch carried out by public employees, the texts explain that the actual states were essentially commandeered by their own subcontractors, all under conditions of complete non-disclosure and deceit.
Now, this introduces a concept you really need to grasp: dormancy, or abeyance. The documents argue that the actual federal government, the one intended and ordained by the ancestors, wasn't destroyed. Instead, it was simply placed on hold. It was forced into a prolonged state of suspension, literally frozen in time while other entities assumed control.
Let's trace how this played out chronologically. The documents state the abeyance officially began in 1860. By March of 1861, the state republic sojourned, which kicked off a staggering 160-year hiatus. Fast forward just a bit, and by 1872, public elections had officially ended. This left only a few historical elements, like the head of state office, with the eventual power to actually recall the states.
Moving on to Section 3, effects on self-governance.
What did this huge, century-and-a-half hiatus actually mean for self-governance in America? According to the provided materials, the actual states were overtaken by territorial and municipal subcontractors. The texts describe this as a massive sleight of hand, where territorial administrative states secretly replaced the actual states of the Union operating under non-conforming constitutions.
And the documents point to a major turning point in the 1960s. They specifically note that state and county governments were seduced into incorporating as franchises. Now, why does that matter? Because, according to the sources, this simple act of incorporating completely changed their law form. It literally moved them off the land jurisdiction and directly into the international jurisdiction of the sea. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the sources organize these jurisdictional changes into what they call the British Romano caste system. It's split into land, sea, and air. On the land, you have living men and women with natural rights operating under common law. Out in the sea jurisdiction, you find human persons with civil rights under admiralty law. And up in the air jurisdiction, that's for incorporated entities or slaves, subject to municipal codes. The text argues that by incorporating, local governments unknowingly shifted their people right off the land.
Okay, let's look at how this builds up in Section 4, long-term consequences.
As you might guess, the system didn't last forever. The documents describe a massive breakdown of the subcontractors. They cite the complete bankruptcy of the municipal government doing business as United States, Inc. in 2015. That was quickly followed by the territorial government's bankruptcy in 2017. And because of this, by operation of law, all delegated powers reverted straight back to the donor, the Federation of States, with a formal reconveyance issued in 2018.
This total sequence of events culminated in a profound dissolution.
The sources clearly state that all territorial administrative states stood entirely dissolved effective October 1st, 2020. According to the texts, this wasn't an accident. It was the natural, preordained result of the process originally set forth in the historical Northwest Ordinance.
Let's move to Section 5, Historical Significance. So, with these powers reverted, how do the source texts say the original assemblies are brought back from dormancy? Well, because the engine of government was left to rust for over a century, jumping back in requires extreme precision. The sources actually provide this exact 12-step assembly process required to reconstruct the lawful government from the ground up, moving from a call to session all the way to official training.
Step 1 is absolutely crucial. It requires a summoning authority to call the states into session. The text notes this can only be done in 3 very specific ways. You need a quorum of 9 states, the President of the United States of America, which the text notes is an office vacated since 1872, or the head of state who owns the Great Seals. Under these unique historical circumstances, only that third option was actually available.
Once that official call goes out, the states answer back through what are called coordinators. You can think of them like the historical circuit riders who used to travel door to door on horseback. These modern liaisons act to physically organize the returning assemblies, helping people declare their birthright political status and guiding everything back into full lawful session.
And finally, let's wrap this all up in Section 6, Summary.
Just to recap exactly what the documents detail. State assemblies are the original bodies with actual lawful standing. An 1860s conflict forced them into an incredible 160-year dormancy. Territorial and municipal subcontractors operated in their absence until massive bankruptcies hit in 2015 and 2017. And finally, by operation of law, all delegated powers reverted back to the Federation of States.
So, we want to leave you with this final thought, based solely upon the texts we've examined today. Now that the Northwest Ordinance process is complete, and these assemblies are shaking off 160 years of dormancy, how will these newly reassembled bodies actually operate and exercise their returned delegated powers moving forward? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.